All right, everybody, I'm going to get started right on time. My name's Sheryl Barnes. I'm the Director of Digital Learning and Residential Education at MIT's Office of Open Learning.
And I'm Meredith Davies. I'm a senior educational technologist at MIT, and I work on the residential team and focus on our residential instance of Open edX.
Great. So we're here today to talk about how MIT is leveraging Open edX in on-campus courses, which is really more or less what Meredith and I do every day. So I'll start the presentation, give you some context, our organizational context at MIT. Meredith will do the bulk of the middle part, explaining specific cases and how people are using the platform, and then I'll wrap up at the end. Okay, so this is MIT. Maybe you've seen it before. I'm going to just explain our context, not because that's directly relevant to you, but because I think it's quite relevant to how we do business in our office, and I think that anybody working in higher ed, the context of your own organization will be hugely important to what you do. In some ways, that's our most important ability, is assessing what will actually work in our context. So MIT has 5 schools. Surely you know it's primarily a technical school, relatively small, about 1,000 faculty, about 11,000 students, slightly more graduate than undergraduate, and importantly, 40% of the undergraduates are computer science majors, 25% are mechanical engineering. The rest share the 30 other majors at the Institute, and it's an R1. You knew that. So this is MIT's organizational structure. This graphic is publicly shared. So Meredith and I work under Sanjay Sarma and Dean Krishna Rajagopal. Sanjay reports directly to Raphael, which is a very sort of unusual structure, I believe. MIT has, I don't know, a belt and suspenders and what is something else you can hold up your pants. So there's a chancellor and a provost. All the student-related activities report up to the chancellor. All the school deans report to the provost, and then we're separate of both of those, also separate from the IT department, which gives us a lot of flexibility. Also mentioning, MIT has a new position over there in the other red box. Ian Waits, the vice chancellor for undergraduate and graduate teaching. There was never before, about 18 months ago, there was never a point person for teaching at the Institute. There was a point person for research. That's an important new function. So we work together with him. The teaching center is under his office. So this is the Office of Open Learning. I am not, thankfully, going to go through each of these boxes in detail. This document is also available and pretty much always out of date because we are always changing rapidly. I would say the Jell-O is never going to set. We will never be static. So we're going to focus today on the section over there on your left, primarily the top 2 boxes, but we'll talk about them all. And just so you know, that's not actually a linear report. We all report to the dean. So MITx, OCW, and MicroMasters do not report into residential education, thankfully. Laughing with my colleagues. Okay, so MIT context. The reason I have this up here is because this part, basically hands-on learning is really central to the core identity of the Institute. And so you'll see, there it is, Mens at Manus, Minds and Hands. MIT has basically been doing active learning before it was even in Cambridge. And I think this is really important in terms of the faculty mindset around innovating with their teaching. So I'm not going to go through every single application that was made in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, but the hands-on, basically the whole place is a lab or a garage, depending on your perspective. So this hands-on, commitment to hands-on teaching and learning proliferated with web apps in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, culminating in some ways with OpenCourseWare in 2001 and MITx in 2012. So I'm going to dive into those two a little more. Has anybody not heard of OpenCourseWare? You don't have, it's okay if you don't. Okay, so I won't spend a lot of time, but I think you all know MIT. I wasn't at MIT, this was long before I was there, but to my mind, MIT shook the world when they decided they would publicly share all of their course materials online for free. And we're still really living that legacy now. So there's 2,400 courses with their materials, 300 million visitors to OpenCourseWare, and I'm proud to be working in the office that is still stewarding this legacy.
I'm just curious, are you doing that primarily through lecture capture?
OpenCourseWare? So OpenCourseWare is not all lecture captured. So it's the course materials, whatever the faculty member wants to share out publicly. And actually, when I got to MIT and discovered that MIT has been paying about 10 people full-time for 20 years to sustain this effort, I was super impressed with the institutional commitment that that represents. Next, and more relevant to today, the MIT launched MITx and then formed edX with Harvard. That's how the story's told on our campus. Others might, just FYI, others might have a different approach. This is, we use MITx to refer both to the MOOCs that are on the edX platform and also to the team that produces those. So this is a more familiar space for you all. We've had, I think it's 120 unique MOOCs, many runs, millions of learners, and MIT is still very much invested in that effort and then innovating on that in lots of interesting ways in all those other boxes in the organizational structure. The MicroMasters program rolled out later, and this is not the focus of our talk, but we have plenty of people here in the room who can answer questions about that if you want to know about those. So, getting to the heart of the matter, my team. So this is the residential education team. I'm on the left, and next to me is Meredith. So we're a small team, and our mission, you'll see on the next slide, is to help faculty at MIT improve teaching and learning with technology for MIT students. So we are sort of like what many schools have in the form of an educational technology group. It'd be interesting to know if any of you are at technical schools how that works, but we're quite a bit leaner than most of the educational technology groups at non-technical schools. There's no other educational technology group at MIT. There is a separate teaching center. So we have a little bit of everything in this one group. Meredith supports the Open edX platform that we're using on campus. It's the focus of our presentation today. Aaron and Anindo are an instructional innovation team of two. Aaron focusing on the learning sciences side of things, and Anindo focusing on the data analytics team side of things. Molly is our force multiplier, so our job is to get faculty to innovate and then get them to tell each other about that innovation. Molly does that in all manner of way. And then Elaine and Jim, there was a question about lecture capture before. They're our hardware team, so we have a small number of rooms that have lecture capture in them. Jim's been building light boards. We support the use of the platform in face-to-face exams with loaner Chromebooks and that sort of thing. So this is the mission of the team in the formal language. Like I said, it's helping faculty improve how they teach with technology. And then now we're just going to talk about, the rest of the talk will be focused specifically on how we're using the Open edX platform in that effort. So right now, you may have seen, we share this number out a lot. And Sanjay's always asking me, why isn't it 100 yet? And the answer is because there's never 100% of anything at MIT. So 99% of the current undergraduates have taken a subject that use the residential MITx platform. And the residential MITx platform is the Open edX platform. That's just how we're branded it. It would be remiss if I didn't mention that MIT's curriculum is rather concentrated. So basically, every first-year student takes a year of physics, a year of calculus, and chemistry and biology. So that 99% of students does not indicate 99% of classes using the platform. If we didn't have such a focused curriculum, that number would be much lower. But we do have a range, and they're labeled subjects here for an MIT audience. You would call them classes or courses, but at MIT the word course means a department, so never mind. Not confusing at all, don't worry about it. So we have basically every department using the platform. And in terms of our strategy, this is how the team works. So on the left, we have the platform and tools and spaces, Aaron and Anindo with the learning science and analytics, and then Molly spinning the wheel ever faster. And then I'm going to hand it over to Meredith to tell you about the stories. We'll say that this is one of the things that we do is capture the stories, as any of you who are in a similar type of group, I'm sure, do as well. We share them all out publicly, so if you want to know more about who's involved in these initiatives or the details of them, they're all available publicly on our website. And I'll hand it over to Meredith.
Sheryl. So I'm Meredith again, as Sheryl mentioned and I mentioned. I'm an educational technologist at MIT, and I focus on our residential platform. So this is the page on our website that shows all of the stories, and you can filter by kind of the different types of learning that instructors are using in their classrooms here. If you're interested in any one particular strategy, I encourage you to check that out. So at MIT, our instance of Open edX is being used for blended learning. We don't grant any credit to courses that don't have interaction with an instructor. So all of our courses are using the platform in conjunction with some on-campus learning as well. And our most popular use case is flipped classroom and active learning. This is a list of a lot of the stories that come from that type of use of the platform. So I'm just going to talk about some of the different use cases and how instructors are accomplishing this. So our first example here is a mechanical engineering or a material science engineering class, and in this course, the instructor decided to use the flipped classroom model, and she has filmed all of her lectures. And so the students can come to class more prepared. And one of her favorite things about using the platform was that it really synced up her problem sets with her lectures and with feedback. So all of that was happening in 1 week instead of the students coming to class and learning, being handed a problem set, turning it in a week later, and then waiting a whole nother week for feedback. Using the MITx platform, all of that can happen within the same week, which really increases students' knowledge of the subject at the time. So you can see Professor Gibson's favorite comment was that from a student was that it made the student happy and confident, which she says is rare to hear at MIT, unfortunately. So this is 802 is an intro physics class, so that's one of the freshman physics classes. And physics was one of our first subjects that used the residential platform, so their course is pretty robust and mature. And the course team took a survey of the students of the various pieces that they use in their teaching. And I don't know if you can see this, but the blue represents extremely helpful and the orange represents very helpful. So what's most notable here, I think, is that you can see that a huge majority of the students found the checkable answers on MITx for written P-sets to be either very helpful or extremely helpful. So getting that instantaneous feedback is really important to them. In this course, since it's an intro course, they're really focused on teaching students how to solve physics problems. So being able to use the platform to do that has been very valuable for them. They can also then, of course, spend a lot more time during the class time doing more interactive activities, which is also kind of a cornerstone of the physics teaching at MIT. This is one of our humanities classes. So we wanted to highlight that, it's not all happening just in the STEM fields at MIT, even though most of our classes kind of have that focus. So this is a class that's actually using a MOOC. So students are using the MOOC as their primary source text for the class. They're sent there to do assignments and watch video, and then they can come to class and have a lot more time interacting there. And this isn't on this slide, but the professor from this class has made a point to share that in his traditional lecture format, he had a student who was researching time him. And in his traditional teaching format, he was talking 80% of the time, and the students were talking 20% of the time. And once he implemented the flipped classroom method, it was a 50-50 split. So you can see that there was a lot more engagement with the students this way. So one of our other use cases is curricular flexibility. This is also an example that comes from physics. And in this course, we have 3 quantum physics courses in the undergrad program at MIT, but 805 could only be offered every other semester traditionally. So the instructor of this course decided to create a MOOC and also experimented with offering the course in the semesters where it's not being taught traditionally. The students are using the MOOC as a flipped classroom model. So they're getting all of their content instruction in the MOOC, and then during their class time, they're able to talk about more deeper learning in physics, talking about research studies and that kind of thing. So in this class, the students were also directed to the MOOC, and this professor has said that the platform really gave him the ability to create a course using the online materials that was as robust and instructive as his traditional course, which is pretty great to hear. He was very thrilled with the outcome. So this is in this example, this comes from our business school, and this is also an example where students are interacting with a MOOC that one of our instructors has built. The instructor really wanted to give the students a view into what it's like for people working in the real world. So they're learning more practical things along with the sort of theoretical knowledge they're learning in the MBA program. So the students who are in the MBA class are spending a lot of time interacting with people out in the real world who are taking the MOOC. And one of the highlights of this example of this story is that a student from this class, his feedback was that the people in the MOOC don't think like us. So that was very eye-opening for the students in the MBA class at MIT to see how people using this content in the real world are applying it. So those are some stories, and if you have any questions about that, we're happy to talk more about them at the end. But we'd also like to give you a little insight into how we're able to use the platform residentially and reach so many instructors and empower them to use the tools that we provide. So one of the most important things that everybody wants to ask about and use is video. And we have a variety of options for video for our instructors. The first are professionally produced, and of course those require a significant amount of money. So we have videos that use interviews recorded on location, animation, demonstrations, and we have a video team at MIT that generally helps with this. But we also have some self-service options. So we can do lecture capture in certain classrooms at MIT, which is great. And we also have this light board, which is the bottom picture here. And that's an open source hardware project that Jim Kane from our residential team built. And the way that this works is the instructor can write on glass, and as it's being recorded, the camera is pointed at a mirror, so it's actually recording the writing in the right way, so you're not seeing the writing backwards. And it's a much more natural experience for the instructor to be able to write and talk at the same time, and requires a lot less money than a typical video production would to accomplish that. So if anybody's interested in that, you can visit the lightboard.info to get the info. We also, of course, on the Open edX platform have a wide range of problem types, and I'm sure most people here are familiar with these problem types. This is, of course, critical to our assessments in our courses. And we recently, our engineering team built an X block aside for multiple choice problems that Peter Pinch did a demo of last year, if anybody was in his session. Does anybody use clickers at their, clicker response? Yeah, at their school. So this was built to replace clickers. They tend to be a huge headache at MIT. The students really have issues with buying clickers, and I think you have to upgrade the software every year. It was just sort of a disaster. So Jolien Bloomfield, who's in here, pioneered this idea of moving it to the platform, and then our engineering team took it over and made this X block. So using this tool, you can get a real-time display of student responses and compare responses from either one class to another, or one instance of asking the question to another, and download a report of the student answer. So this is just as a zoomed-in view of what those graphs look like, and the drop-down menu for comparing. So we're pretty excited about that, and if anybody has questions about that, also happy to talk more about it. We're also trying to make steps towards really focusing our efforts in data-driven ways. As Candace talked about during her keynote, kind of taking the information that we're gathering from all of these clicks that are happening on our platform and using that to make smart decisions. So the way that we do that at MITx is the data is collected from our residential server, and it gets processed using edX to BigQuery, which is also open source and available to anyone. The institution owns the large project of our BigQuery data, but we are able to get copies of what we're particularly interested in. So the residential team maintains a copy of the data that comes from MITx. And then we have a few ways that we use that data. We've built an analytics dashboard for our institution that reports out to the instructors of the course. And we have Anindo and Aaron, who were highlighted on the residential team page. Our learning scientists and our data scientists are able to use that data to help our instructors do some research and also see how their problems are performing. And instructors can also have access to that data if they want to slice it and look at it in any way. That's an option as well. So we're starting to use this data more and more. From some examples from our instructors are, one person did a project to see where to place videos and quiz questions, to whether to put them after the videos or interspersed in videos. One of the stories that we looked at, 805, that instructor is using the data to really see how difficult his questions are and how discriminatory they are. So how many students are attempting them, and then how many students are performing well on them, what's the range, what's the level there. And we also have had a recent use case of using this data to identify students who are struggling in a course to then have an early intervention and be able to identify and help support them throughout the rest of the course. So we have a few different groups that are helping support our residential platform. Our engineering team handles our instance of Open edX and also provides new feature work. So they built that X block, and we have some other customizations that we've added, ways that we've extended the platform for MIT. The educational technology team, which is the team that I work on, and along with a few other educational technologists, and we help support the platform from a technical standpoint and also provide orientations for the instructors. So once an instructor has expressed interest in developing a course for MIT, we offer to meet with them and give them an overview of Studio or the XML workflow if that's what they choose to use. And from that point, it's really a self-service model, and they can write into us with questions, but we kind of put the heavy load on them to develop their own course content. So all of the course content for our residential platform and for our MOOCs is developed by the subject matter experts, not anyone else in the institution, certainly not the educational technology team. We have the classroom tools, which you saw the video, and we also support online exams. We have just two people working on that, but really great. And we also have our data and learning science support. So in addition to offering just a general platform training for Studio, we also offer to help with course design. Instructors can meet with our learning designer to kind of talk about best practices for setting up their course and how to think about using this blended learning approach to its fullest extent. So I think that's back to Sheryl.
So a little bit more about how we accomplish this. So this group of people is really central to the success of actually our MOOCs and our residential efforts. So the Digital Learning Lab is a group of largely postdocs, but some graduate students and some others. They are co-funded by the Office of Open Learning and the departments. Importantly, they are experts in the disciplines, they are located in the disciplines, and they are of the tribe of the discipline. So here's my new, it's MIT style lightweight graphics, but I'm pretty happy with this. This is the schema of how this program works. So we have a disciplinary expert. They come to us at least with interest and some experience in educational technology and the learning sciences. Their range of experiences there can vary widely. They certainly don't need to be expert in either of those other two things. They do have to be a disciplinary expert. So they are located in the departments. Then we get several of them. There are about 15 now. Convene them as a community of practice, and transformational change happens. Yay. So this is, sorry my arrows are kind of lame, but this keeps going, right? This is not just a one-way thing. But the important features here are really twofold. Is the being embedded in the departments and then being convened as a community of practice. So I don't know about at your institutions, but at ours, faculty don't much want to take advice from somebody who's not in their own discipline. These people being of the discipline and also physically located in the department where they participate in the activities of the department is really, really important. In substantive ways, of course, they can contribute much more robustly to course creation and the content and the assessments and all of that because they're experts in the discipline. They also obviously develop relationships and trust and fulfill a wide number of functions within the departments as well, which is really important. But if they were only embedded in the departments, they would all be reinventing round wheels all the time and falling over the same challenges with the platform and trying to do a really wide range of activities on their own. So it's quite important that they're also participate as a community of practice. They meet in our office every 2 weeks, and I think I see people, meeting 2 by 2 or groups of 2s and 3s regularly. So these folks are very much present in our office and also in the department. So that's a really key factor. Another factor, as you might imagine, is money. So, and we've both, I don't know if we've said it exactly out loud, but because we're running the same software locally in the form of the Open edX platform that we call Residential MITx, the same software that powers the MOOC, that's how we're able to easily move courses between the two platforms. So anybody who's tried to move courses between LMS systems understands that that's a completely non-trivial problem. So I just wanted to say that out loud. We're assuming that's part of what we're talking about here today. The other part is funding. So there is no funding at all for residential-only efforts. So all the funding, with sort of one exception now, is for MOOCs. So through the Office of Open Learning, people can apply for grants to build MOOCs or parts of MOOCs. And then, because we're running the same software locally, they can leverage that in their residential class. So it's really a way of, MIT is all in with edX and the MOOCs. It's a way of getting additional local benefit out of that really substantial investment. And the one sort of exception now, initially up there, that full grant, that was the only grant that was available. And now we have, it's really hard for me to say, express explorations. So it's a smaller grant for experimentation. And those, I don't think we've had any that were only residential. People still have to say they might use this in a MOOC one day to get the money, but it's a much smaller commitment. It could be a tool, it could be a real experiment. The MOOCs, we expect them to work. We expect them to be built and to be delivered, whereas the express explorations, which opens the door to residential projects in a broader way, is a smaller grants that are more experimental. And we only give the money to MIT faculty. So I'm going to end with one more thing I wanted to say just about the organizational context, which is that really open learning as a whole organization it sounds really trite, but it is an innovation ecosystem. So the on-campus work that we're doing by being located in the same group that MITx is in the same group that OpenCourseWare is in the same group that the MicroMasters is in, and also boot camps and XPro and an endless series of innovations that are coming out of the office. And that the office as a whole is intended to be self-supporting financially. So it's actually it can feel a little overwhelming because there's a lot going on. There are about 150 of us total. There's new faces all the time and new projects, but it's a really interesting structure to be able to sustain residential innovation by embedding it in a group that also includes people who are making money, because my line is like, the student's already paid, right? Like, my team is not gonna make money for open learning. So I think it's a really interesting model that Sanjay's put in place. So I'm just gonna conclude by letting one of our Nobel Prize winning physicists talk about his innovation with the Open edX platform and how After 23 years of teaching at MIT, it transformed him as an instructor. And this is basically our sort of gold when we're able to capture a faculty member like this telling his story. And it just occurs to me I didn't check if we have sound. Well, let's see what happens. Okay, great. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Does Brian want to tell me something? Should I try it? Okay, great. All right. Wait, go ahead or no? Okay, so here's Wolfgang Ketterle.
So for me, I have to say, the residential course with the online material was for me a transformative experience as a teacher. The experience of the flipped classroom, which means I use online lectures, but then use the classroom time for discussions, has changed my experience in a number of ways. One is, I've never ever had a class which was so interactive. The engagement of the students was for me unprecedented. Another aspect which was different for me is how I felt in the classroom. The students can observe a working physicist, a physicist in action. I think video lectures, segmented video lectures, online concept questions, online problems are wonderful elements, and they should be integrated into the classroom, but really balanced with the personal face-to-face and interactive experience.
Great. So that's pretty exciting when he says that. So that's what we prepared for you, and we're really hoping to, we have a long list of things that we still want, so we can jump right to that, but we'd like to take questions from you. What questions do you have? What comments do you have? Do you have any similar stories to tell? I notice you're often the first questioner, so I'm going to hold off and see if somebody else wants to go first this time. Yes, we have a microphone.
Check. All right, so just to get it clear, because it gets a little confusing when you get to the grants and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So Open edX is your platform for flipped classroom, that's fine. And those are being used for on-campus courses as the source material. And so in the grant piece, they're really supposed to be for external use, but also used for internal, or what? That's the part where I'm a little lost.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent.
So I think fairly, Sanjay's position has been, it's not the Office of Open Learning's job to fund MIT faculty to build residential courses, you know, whether or not they're using technology. Sure. And so I think there may be a dynamic that some of you are familiar with, that like we're not, you know, we're not the chancellor's office or the provost's office. So I think there's been a concern about opening kind of a side door and the expectation getting out of hand that somehow we're funding all instructional innovation at the Institute. And that's not what we're just not staffed to do that. But
And so the grant program is for external courses that you hope will get used as flipped also.
yes.
And is that course releases and funds to your unit, or how does that all work?
Yeah, I can talk about that. And I will say, we are trying to drive a virtuous cycle between global and local instructional innovation. That is a clear objective, but most of the money goes to funding global courses. So in the MITx grants, the funds that people are asking for are for a variety of things. The big ticket items in there are usually video production and a point person as a course developer, project manager, course developer. So a DLL like you saw, or some other person. Our model is quite different from HarvardX. We actually don't build the courses in our office. So when you get a grant as a faculty member, it's your job to hire somebody. We'll help you, figure out what kind of person you need, and we have sample job descriptions and all that sort of stuff, but it's up to you to find a grad student or a postdoc or somebody in your discipline who can actually help be essentially your right-hand person to build the course. Did I get to all of your questions? Great.
Are you listening? Yeah. Okay. I studied at MIT, and I didn't have any classroom with the professor like writing in a board.
No?
But in my country, almost all the teachers do the same thing. It's the professor in the blackboard all the time. You have to memorize, and then they ask you questions in the quizzes and exams about what he did in the blackboard, right? So, the question is, your methodology is like open for the professors to choose what to do, how to do it. Have you proved these methods in another cultures, like pedagogical cultures,
Right.
less active cultures? Do you have any standardized something to manage the professor? Because we are trying to push this forward in our universities in Colombia.
Yep.
So we have a training program for the university, but I was wondering if you have any to help us
Right.
to do this with the professors. Yeah.
Yes. So in our documents related to the grant are all publicly available online. In the call for the last, actually, I think since the beginning, or maybe the second round, for the last 4 years, we put in there that funding priority will be given to projects that leverage research-based teaching practices. And we have some that we recommend. They tend to be they are solidly on the learning sciences side of things. Our office, as a kind of disposition, stays away from what you would call promoting more traditional instructional design methodologies, backwards design. We don't actually even really try to push faculty through that process. I mean, we sort of have to, in a way, when it gets to the production stage, but that is kind of a non-starter with MIT faculty. You know, they're not interested in me telling them that they need to write learning outcomes for their classes. Like, that's just not workable. So it's a dynamic that we've been struggling with, and my colleagues and I we've been trying to leverage the grant process and refine that over the years to make that be the vehicle to try to move the structure and the design of the courses forward, if I'm understanding your question. So we take compared to some schools where they'll say, this is we're giving you money, this is a process you have to do, these are the criteria you have to meet. That's really just not sort of politically palatable in our environment. So we take a gentler approach, and we try to engage the faculty in being curious about what are these research-based teaching practices and how might they leverage them, and how can that perhaps help solve some of the challenges they may have in their residential class. So it's much more of a carrot than a stick, if you're familiar with that metaphor.
I think we got time for just like one quick one, maybe.
I don't know. What?
Very, very interesting talk, and
Thank you.
I'm very interested in the sensitivity about, you know, the different academic cultures. In the 70s, MIT had a really dynamic and interesting division for research and education, which used to try to engage with other parts of MIT, and sadly that was closed. Do you think you're not now in a position where you really need to, you know, emulate universities like Stanford or Harvard or Edinburgh and actually have a fully functioning education faculty that can actually comment from a high point on educational practice?
Sure. You know Sanjay, talk to him. Yeah, right, it's, I would not argue against that. and it's above my pay grade. But I think if Stanford's doing it, we better get on board, right? Isn't that how this works? We say the same thing. Yeah. You're right. Joking aside, I do think, actually Meredith mentioned Candace's talk earlier. I think actually, demonstrating to faculty the value of the data that's available in the platform and the feedback loop between their instruction, and we can have a much tighter circle there, and with dashboards that might benefit them and their students. I do think, at least at MIT, people want you to show them. Nobody wants you to talk about it. So I think we're much closer to being able to actually kind of deliver the goods in advance and perhaps leverage more resource down the road. But it'd be interesting to talk with you more about what was happening at MIT in the 70s. All right, I think we're good. I'm getting a hook. Great. Thank you. If you have more questions, we're available.